I thought I'd start off, before I answer that question, just to tell you a little bit about the team that I'm on at Amazon. I am part of the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team here at Amazon. Really, our focus is to set the strategic DEI vision for the company. And part of that really includes creating a culture that is welcoming to people of all backgrounds around the world. Today, we have more than 250 diversity and inclusion practitioners working around the world on behalf of our 1 million plus employees. And so we have a large network that we leverage, especially in today's climate where we're all mostly virtual and still working from home. We look at, what are some things that we can do to continue to build and strengthen our culture of inclusion. And one of the things that we do, because we are a data-driven organization, is we have an internal mechanism called Connections that allows us to poll and survey our employees daily with a connections question that's really about inclusion. So some sample questions might be, I feel connected with my team, yes or no. My manager includes me in some of the decision making, agree or disagree. So we take all the data that we compile and we looked at, what were the main themes coming out of the information that we were getting from our employees. So we found that when our employees think about and feel about inclusion, 4 angles or 4 pillars really stood up for us. Number one, our employees want to feel informed. They want to make sure they have the information and data to do their jobs. Second, our employees want to feel valued for the contributions that they make day in and day out. Third, our employees want to feel trusted to do their jobs and meet the commitments that they're being held accountable for. And lastly, they want to feel connected to their teammates and the culture at Amazon. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit more about connections. And so one of the things that we are doing at Amazon, as far as building this culture of inclusion while we're virtual and working from home, is we like to build community leveraging our 12 affinity groups that we have at Amazon. Today, we have more than 90,000 members that are part of 500 affinity group chapters globally. And what's interesting is that we've seen a year-over-year increase of 60% of membership growth in our affinity groups. And we've also seen a 90% year-over-year increase in employees that joined more than one affinity group. And currently, we're seeing a spike with our Asians at Amazon affinity group, given the anti-Asian hate crimes and violence that's happening around the world. And we're seeing employees from other communities become part of the Asians at Amazon affinity group to show support, so that we think that's a great thing that's happening here at Amazon. And so just to give you a sense of the size of our Asians at affinity group, it's about 15,000 strong. So we have, again, I said 12 affinity groups. That includes our Black Employee Network, our Latinos at Amazon, Amazon Women in Engineering, Glamazon for our LGBTQ employee community. And we really leverage our affinity groups to, create programming internally at Amazon that's intended to, bring communities together, to share perspectives, to share, what's important for certain communities. And a lot of the similarities that, we see, no matter what community you're in, that we deal with living and working in this time of the pandemic and, working from home remotely. So we lean heavily on our affinity groups to help us design our internal events. We have a MAZECon, which is our annual gender diversity conference that's held every year. We have conversations on race and ethnicity or core. And so we work with affinity groups to, help identify external speakers that we can bring in. We look at, who are the right internal Amazonians that we can leverage to come in and talk about a particular topic. And so our affinity groups are a great mechanism for us that we leverage to really kind of continue to create this employee engagement and inclusion in this time that we're in. And in addition to that, I'll close by saying that, we rely on our affinity groups to also, when we have these global observances or celebration months, like Women's History Month, Global Accessibility Awareness Month, et cetera, they are coming to our team and they're coming with ideas about programs throughout the month. It could be live programming, it could be recorded programs, multimedia assets, and they're all around educational and support programming and services. So, for those of you that do have affinity groups in other companies, I think they're a great resource, not only on the business side, because we also work with our affinity groups to help us make sure that we're developing the right products and services for customers around the world. And we tap them a lot for, multicultural different purposes. So that's just a high level glimpse of how we're looking at inclusion here at Amazon.
Thanks so much. That's also a great segue. Molly, I want to turn to you. What are some of the resources that you are providing to support employees at Salesforce?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So at Salesforce, we want to build a company that reflects society, right? We are increasingly sitting across the table from more diverse customers that have different demands and needs, and we want our community to reflect that. Much like our friends at Amazon just discussed, we have 12 thriving employee resource groups as well. And I like to always say they're financially empowered to be on the front lines of their community. You can't go to Pride in June if you haven't put your deposit down in January. So it shouldn't be about 10 cupping, right, and stressing to get the funds. But when I think about what are the specific interventions we have to support our employees through crisis or trauma that might happen, I want to call out two things we're specifically working on. We created something called the Warm Line, and we adopted this practice from Intel. And predominantly focusing on women and underrepresented minorities, we're saying it's an employee advocacy hotline. Call this hotline if you feel stuck in your career. We noticed that women said, well, there's not something egregious happening. No one's touching me, but I just feel like something's happening. And now we have the vocabulary to understand that those are microaggressions, right? Those everyday little snide comments and remarks that really erode trust, kind of build self-doubt, and really make folks say, am I welcome here? Do I belong here? Am I crazy, or did they just say something like this to me? So we created the Warm Line as an employee advocacy program. And of course, you can still call the third-party ethics hotline if you want to report business misconduct, employee relations or performance or reporting. But we're really finding a lot of our employees just need help having what we're calling a courageous conversation, resolving a conflict. I'm stuck in my career. Hey, we just had promotion season. That didn't really seem fair. I'm getting this signal from my leadership or this feedback. And where can employees go to really feel like there's a trusted resource whose primary focus is to advocate for them and resolve their issues? So that's one of the things we're heavily focused on. And then making sure that we're calling out things that happen. We have a significant Atlanta presence and office. And I will say since the pandemic started, we've been raising this conversation around the Asian community, whether it's the bamboo ceiling where you might see in tech companies, Asians in representation, but lacking in leadership. What's the leadership development? How do we disarm concepts like the model minority? And just this morning, we hosted what we called an equality circle. So a timing of process and healing, and really where we're sharing resources and giving our allies action to take in response to the rise and surge of anti-Asian violence. How are our employees processing that? How are they getting through that? What are the resources? So really just making sure that we're calling out those things, that we're having those conversations and being really intentional about our language. And one of the trainings we've seen a rise of this year is what we call inclusive language, right? So we're very clearly saying, it's not like that terrible incident that happened with George Floyd. No, George Floyd was murdered, right? And what is that intentional language? And when we talk to our allies, what is that intentional behavior? Read this, go here. I'll give you one quick example. Last year, there was a lot of talk in the tech community whether Juneteenth, the day we celebrate that, and recognize that slavery ended, do we take the day off? Is it a holiday? And we went to Bold Force, our Black employee resource group, and they said, we actually don't want the day off. We want a day of education, right? And we brought in Ibram X. Kendi, and we said, the first X thousands of people who sign up get the book and read the book, and let's have a discussion. And we hosted the author, and we had him interviewed, and we put forth a discussion guide, and then folks could break up in their teams or in groups or in their employee resource group and lead a discussion about that, right? So really just making sure we're here to support our employees where they need us. And also it's about being actionable, recognizing that things are happening within their community. And the last part I'll say to a nod to Antonio, it all is about our ERG saying, hey, my community's being impacted. Where are you? Right? I'm not going to know the issue that impacts every community. I need them to raise their hand, and Employee Resource Groups is a great organization to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Molly. Amy, I'll turn to you now. There has been an emergence of what some are calling the shadow pandemic of intimate partner violence. Now that the distinction between work and home has become more blurred than ever before, this could be affecting how employees are showing up to work. What steps can employers take to better understand these dynamics and to support their employees?
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me, and to the other panelists. I'm so excited to be here. Again, my name is Amy Durant. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Director of Systems Change Initiatives for Free From. We're a national nonprofit working to create pathways to financial security and long-term safety for survivors of intimate partner and gender-based violence. And so really, even before the advent of COVID-19, the experience of intimate partner violence was incredibly disruptive for survivors' employment. In fact, up to 60% of survivors lose their job as a result of the experience of intimate partner violence. And 77% of survivors, 77%, I like to say that twice because it's such a stark percentage, 77% report that a harm doer has interfered with their ability to work or make an income. And so COVID has only exacerbated this existing problem as it's trapped survivors at home with their harm doers full time. And so as a rapid response to COVID, our organization last year pivoted some of our programming and started getting unrestricted cash directly to survivors. Now, to date, we have given grants to about 4,100 survivors from across the country. And through that process, we learned from the folks who we were able to give grants to that a third of them were identifying safe employment as their most urgent top need. Their most urgent top need, a full third of those survivors. And so some folks might ask, okay, well, why is employment so essential for survivors? And the reality is that the number one obstacle to safety for survivors is financial insecurity. So put another way, survivors are trapped in danger because they just can't afford an alternative. And so in addition to that, the experience of abuse is incredibly expensive for survivors. So the CDC estimates that it costs female survivors $104,000 in medical bills and lost productivity over the course of their lifetime. $104,000. But this number does not even include the added cost of economic abuse. And what I mean when I say economic abuse is when a harm doer takes action to control a survivor's finances to in turn control that survivor. And so 99% of survivors experience economic abuse, and that experience in itself has additional staggering costs. So for example, survivors report that harm doers, and this was before the pandemic, I should clarify, they reported that harm doers were stealing an average of $1,280 from them every month. $1,280 from them every month. And that could look like monitoring online bank accounts and depleting online bank accounts, taking folks' paycheck, things like that. And survivors also report losing out on an average of $23,000 in lost income each year. And so a stable income is absolutely essential for survivors to be able to cover their costs and start saving the money they need to get to safety. And so it's not really enough for us to help survivors find jobs. We also have to help survivors keep jobs. And this means creating survivor-centered workplaces. And, some employers might think, okay, I understand this is an important issue. I care about this issue, but what does this really have to do with us at our company? Like, how does this impact us? And the reality is that right now today, 1 in 4 cis women and nearly 1 in 2 trans folks experience intimate partner violence. So 1 in 4 cis women, 1 in 2 trans folks. That means that every employer, whether they realize it or not, is employing survivors. And so what can survivors really do to support their staff, during COVID and beyond, and how can they really build a survivor-centered workplace? So I have a couple of really actionable suggestions that I can walk through. And so, but before I do that, I will say, I think a lot of times when folks think about, okay, the intersection of employment and intimate partner violence, what does that look like? Okay, well, it looks like maybe a harm doer, coming in and harassing staff, including the survivor at the workplace location. And that is true. And sometimes harm doers will make incessant phone calls and things like that. But there is more that employee. So I guess I should step back and say, I think a lot of employers are thinking when they think intimate partner violence, how can we create a safe workplace? And that's very important. It's crucial. But in addition to that, as I, march through all these really dismal statistics about survivors' financial security, and I should say financial insecurity, there's a lot that employers can do to support survivors in just building that financial security. Building that financial security they need to be able to cover these costs and get to long-term safety. And so first and foremost, the number one actionable recommendation I always give to employers is implement a survivor paid and protected leave policy to give your staff the time they need to deal with the consequences of abuse. If that looks like maybe going to court, going to a doctor to get treatment for injuries, getting yourself or your children therapy, relocation. There's a lot of things that survivors really need to take care of, and they need time to do that. But it's really essential that that leave is paid and protected, because most survivors simply cannot afford to take time off work if it means they're going to miss a paycheck, or if it means that their job might not be waiting for them when they get back. And in fact, we're actually partnering right now with Berkshire Bank. Love Berkshire Bank. They're an amazing partner with us, and they're actually working with us to implement a 15-day paid and protected leave policy for all of their employers to deal with the consequences of gender-based violence, so intimate partner violence, stalking, sexual assault. So we're very excited about that partnership, and we're going to be releasing a report probably later this year on what we found working with them about basically the cost-benefit analysis of implementing such a policy. Also, you can do things like offering flexible schedules and after COVID work from home options, and providing benefits to support survivors in finding and paying for childcare. That's always really, really essential for survivors. Creating a savings match program for your staff, offering employees regular wellness and or mental health check-ins. So basically just asking folks what they need. And I'll give you an example of something that we at FreeFrom did after the pandemic sort of started. So we're a team of survivors. A lot of the folks on our staff are survivors, and a lot of folks on our staff are parents. And, some of our folks, they have children, and all of a sudden their kids are having to go to virtual school. Well, they said, I'm going to have to take a step back from work because I have to sit with my kids and supervise my kids in order for them to participate in virtual school. Well, that was going to be hugely impactful for them because they need to still be making money, still be working. So we at FreeFrom actually hired a professional tutor to come in and sit with the kids, for the staff's kids while they're working, to supervise them for their virtual school, so those folks didn't have to step away from work. So that's just an example. Other things are doing things like offering access to financial coaches and emergency grants for survivors who urgently need cash for things like relocating and the costs that are associated with relocating, like buying new furniture, buying new clothes for your kids. I think oftentimes, for us that aren't necessarily in the moment, we don't necessarily think of all of the costs associated with having to pick up and completely start your life over. It's extraordinarily expensive. So having that ability for staff to ask for those or apply for emergency grants can be hugely impactful. And then another one that I always love to talk about is paying folks a living wage. Here at FreeFrom, that's one of our main priorities. We're out here in Los Angeles, and no one at our organization is paid less than $65,000 a year. That is our salary floor. And so we're always encouraging our partners to pay everyone a living wage. Also, it's creating internal working groups to comment on or advise on workplace policies. So when those are being developed, designed, and implemented, you can hear from your staff how they're impacting them and really make sure that you're accounting for survivors' unique circumstances and needs. And to just quickly run through a few more benefits, because at FreeFrom, we understand that we too are an employer, right? And we've got a staff that we know, of folks that are survivors and have experienced these things. And so we need to be walking the walk while we're talking the talk. And so we offer folks benefits like a wealth building reimbursement benefit. And so that will allow folks, we'll reimburse them up to a certain amount for doing things like putting a down payment on for a house. We also we ourselves have a gender-based violence paid and protected leave, offer emergency grants up to $2,000 for our staff that are experiencing gender-based violence. Pay a living wage. We have a savings match program for our staff. We also have reimbursements for fertility treatments and gender affirming therapies and treatments, because we really just want to ensure that we are invested in the financial well-being and prosperity of all of our staff. Because when you help people build financial security, you're helping them stay safe. You're keeping them safe. And so, the reality is that not only is supporting your staff that are experiencing this type of harm or violence the right thing to do, it's also good for business. You increase productivity. There's studies that suggest that employees spend an average of about 8 hours a week worrying about money. And so if you are helping your staff, your employees build that financial security, you're actually also helping productivity. You increase retention and reduce turnover, saving money on training, et cetera. And so there are also really good business, I suppose, reasons for having these really supportive policies. And I do want to just note, and in closing that, I hear sometimes when I talk about these issues, employers, HR folks are kind of like, well, I'm worried because I don't think my staff is actually going to be comfortable enough to disclose what they're experiencing. And that's a legitimate concern. And part of the problem with that is that we don't talk about it enough as a society. But what employers can do is they can create these sort of safe spaces by having these overt, explicit policies supporting folks who are experiencing harm to really destigmatize that experience and bring people in and welcome them in a way that will make people feel more comfortable disclosing, and that way they can get those resources that they really need to stay employed, build their financial security, and stay safe. And so I just want to close to say that we're constantly working with employers to help them better support their survivor staff. So I would really encourage anyone on the call that's interested to reach out to me, because I would love to talk to you more about how you could do that at your company or organization.